Welcome. In this video, I'm going to show you a tour of the Capture tab. Now, I'm going to open up, in this case, a previous capture, though the new Capture tab is fairly similar. There are options that are different on each. For instance, on the new Capture tab, you can start a capture and stop a capture, but on an open Capture tab, you don't have those options. But one that you do have is, for instance, the reassembly button that appears here at the top. So the first area I'm going to focus in on is the frame summary. The frame summary is located in the middle panel by default and basically contains a list of all the frames that you can select and a description of that frame, as well as a bunch of other columns. And these are set up as columns because you can change their size if you want by clicking on the divider and moving it left or right. And you can also choose columns that you want to have show up in the interface. You can do this simply by right-clicking on the column and say Choose Columns. And this will bring up a dialog box which allows you to select the available columns on the left, and these represent properties in our language, and you can select any one of them as a possible column. And on the right side is the list of all the current columns. You can move them around here, but you can also move them around by dragging and dropping them on the frame summary. Now, another feature of the frame summary is the ability to select frames, multiple frames, and copy them to the clipboard. And one reason this is important is because it allows you to document things easily in other programs, as well as take that data and analyze it into a different program. So I'm going to go ahead and copy the data. I'm going to bring up Excel, and I'm just going to paste. And you'll see that when I do that, it actually puts all the data that I had available as columns and tabulated them in Excel. So for instance, if I wanted to add up all the values in this column, I could do that now. This is also useful for organizing the data, graphing the data, and as I said before, documenting it as notes for a case, let's say. Now, another thing you can do is in Word, you can also insert the data. It's tabulated, and one cool feature that Word has, and this is true of the Word email, so if you're sending an email, you can get this same feature. So you can insert a table based on that data you select, and it'll tablify it as well. So this is really cool. So the next thing I want to point out is whenever you select a frame in the frame summary, the frame details is updated. So I'm going to go ahead and select frame 7, zoom in, and you'll see that it's now focused in on frame 7. In fact, the first line of the frame details is the lowest layer, and it's the frame itself. It shows you its number, its length, and then so on. You have Ethernet, IPv4, and TCP in this particular case. But it's all based on the fact that I clicked on number 7 in the frame summary. Now you can expand this data. So for instance, I've opened up the Ethernet header, and you'll see that underneath it, it has more items that you can open up. So you can continually investigate and explore deeper into the frame by opening up each section. Now the frame details also has the ability to copy, and for instance, if I wanted to put the data as documentation for this one frame, I'll show you in Notepad. Now in that case, I've copied just the line. Another option is you could copy the whole tree, and that's whatever's opened at that point. So that when you do that, it shows you the whole tree. So you can open up what you want and then copy the data to pass it on to somebody else that perhaps you just want to show a snapshot of the trace rather than the whole trace itself. So whenever you click in the frame details, something else happens in the hex details, which is the box right next to it. So if I click on destination address in the frame details, you can see that in the hex details, it has also highlighted a section of bytes, and those are the bytes associated with that field. Now it also goes backwards. If you double click in a section, let's for instance double click the second section, you'll see that now it's highlighted that, and again highlighted the appropriate section in the frame detail, so it lets you go backwards. So looking at more detail of the hex details, what we have as far as information is we have a status that shows you the protocol offset, the frame offset, and there's also the number of bytes that are selected. It's cut off due to how I had to take this video. There's a columns button that allows you to set the number of columns. It can be automatic based on the size of the window or fixed at various values. And then finally we have a decode button, decode as. This allows you to take any selected bytes, so you could select some bytes manually and decode it as another structure that exists in the MPL in our namespace, or as a protocol. So if for some reason Network Monitor is not parsing something properly, you can force it to parse as something. So now let's go ahead and look at the top part, which is the display filter. And we actually have multiple tabs that can show up here. Again, in the capture video, I explained more about the fields associated with capturing, such as the select networks. There's also a capture filter, which works differently than a display filter, but we'll talk about just the display filter here. This is where you would enter a filter to narrow down the frames you see in the frame summary. So you can type in this section, and you get the IntelliSense that we talk about in our filter video. Once you find the filter you want to apply, you can simply hit the apply button, and now the filter will be applied and it'll filter out the frames in the frame summary that you can see has now been updated. So I typed in HTTP, and now it's only showing me a subset of the frames based on that filter. There's also a remove button. There's a display to the right here that shows you the filter that is applied. So for instance, if I start typing a new filter, the dialog tells you what filter is currently applied because it might be different than the filter that you're currently typing now. There's also a verify button that you can verify to make sure your filter is okay before applying it. You can save a filter, which allows it to then show up in My Filters. So for instance, I've saved a filter called HTTP command. Under here, there's also the list of standard filters, which I talk more detail in the filters video. And then finally on the left side is the history, the filters that you have already applied. Next to the display filter tab is the aliases tab. This allows you to assign friendly names to IP addresses so that they look more recognizable in the frame summary. So one simple way to do this is to simply copy the source column, create a new alias, and then just give it a name. Then once you hit the apply button, you'll see it update in the frame summary. To the left, we have the conversation window, which I go over in detail with the conversation video. So look to that video for more information. At the top of the screen, we have the reassemble button, which allows you to recombine fragmented data. And there's also a video on that as well. At the top, we have a find button. And the find button lets you locate frames that match a particular filter. So for instance, to find the next HTTP frame, I could type in HTTP and hit find. At the bottom of the screen, we have the status information. In a captured trace, they're a little bit different than in a new trace, but here we have the displayed frames, the number of frames that are currently displayed by the filter, the number of captured frames that exist in the capture. Focused is the frame that you've actually have selected, and then if you have multiple frames selected, it'll show you that count as well. The last thing I'm going to show you are color filters, which is a really cool way to make specific frames stand out. So for instance, if I wanted to just make HTTP frames a specific color, I select it here. I can select a background color as well as a text style. And then when I apply that color, you'll see that it gets updated in the frame summary. So hopefully you picked up some things about the Capture UI, and that is the end of the video. So long.